The glass rod shattered. Caspar did not stoop for it. The sound from the marsh had already swallowed the small noise at his feet. Not a crack, not a snap, but a grinding groan of timber giving way, and under it the sucking pull of the fenmore taking something heavy and meaning to keep it. He crossed to the window with the shard still under his boot. 40 paces out, past the gravel, the black water held a swaying point of lamplight, and in that light a hull tilted stern down into the channel. A barge, aground and going under. He saw the cage before he understood it. An iron frame stood open in the hold, welded at the joints, and figures moved inside it against the bars while the water climbed their legs. Not cargo. People. He had spent years teaching himself to want nothing and ask for nothing, and the wanting came back now in one breath, the way feeling returns to a numb hand, all at once, and it hurts. He pulled his coat from the hook without looking. His fingers found the bandolier on the bench and read the vials by shape, the way he read everything in the dark now, by touch and memory and the one good eye. 12 slots, 10 of them filled. He buckled it across his chest, took the brass-shod staff, and went out. The cold took his breath at the door. The mud took his boot at the 10th step. He drove the staff down ahead and tested each pace, sinking to the shin, then the knee, the marsh water filling his boots and climbing past feeling into pain. His blind side was a wall of nothing on the left. He kept the light on his right and waded toward it while the wanting in his chest said, "Faster," and the marsh said, "You will join them if you hurry." He reached the hull as the last of the stern slid down. 2 things he understood at once. There had been guards, and they were gone. A punt cut loose and poling hard for the far bank, 2 shapes in it, leaving the locked hold to drown. And the woman at the bars was not screaming. She was watching him. Green-skinned, gaunt, her hair bound in one rough plait, and her eyes caught the lamplight and held it. "You're the apothecary," she said. Not a question. Her voice came level over the rising water, fast and clean. "I can smell the work on you. You carry acid in those vials." Caspar got a hand on the bars. The iron was slick and cold and did not give. "The lock won't open," she went on, before he could spend a word. "Deep mine iron, no key on the barge. They keep it ashore. Don't touch the lock, the welds, lower corner, your side. They cooled too fast in the forging. That's the seam that breaks." He found the corner by feel. She was right. The bead of metal sat proud and uneven where a tired smith had rushed it. Behind her the others had gone quiet, packed to the high end of the cage, the water at their waists. A child's face turned toward him in the dark. "Which vial?" the woman said. "Not which can you spare, which?" "The 4th," Caspar answered, and his own voice surprised him, rough from years of disuse. He uncorked it by thumb, poured along the weld, and the acid bit with a hiss and a stink of hot metal. He counted 3 breaths he did not have, then set the brass cap of the staff against the corner and threw his whole ruined weight on the wood. Nothing. He threw it again. The water reached the captives' chests, and somewhere in the dark the child made a sound that went into him like a splinter. On the 3rd heave the seam tore with a flat crack, and the bars folded inward. After that it was only hands. He pulled them out one at a time onto the slope of mud that still held, the strong ones first, because the strong ones could stand and steady the next. The woman did not climb out. She stayed waist-deep at the broken frame and passed the weak ones into his arms, counting under her breath, and when the lantern finally drowned and the last of the light went, she did not stop. She called the line to him through the dark. "Left, now straight, mind the soft ground there." Her voice the only thing in the world that knew where the dead earth lay. The child came across last but one, light as a bundle of reeds, clinging to his coat. The woman came across last. 11 of them stood on the firm hummock, shaking, breathing, alive. Behind them the marsh closed its mouth over the cage and gave back a few rising bubbles, and then not even those. Casper stood among strangers he could not name, his hands raw, his coat heavy with the Fenmore, and the woman turned her amber eyes on him in the dark and asked the one thing he had no answer ready for. "Why," she said, "would a man do that?" He had no answer that would fit the cold, so he gave her the only one a healer gives at midnight. Inside. "All of you, now." A man who stops to explain himself while strangers freeze is no use to anyone, and Casper had been useless in enough ways to know the difference. They crossed the gravel in a line, the strong carrying the weak, and 11 bodies crowded into a room built for one man and his glass. He fed the stove until the iron glowed and the shelves began to sweat, and he did not let himself count the winter's fuel going up in a night. There would be time to be poor again later. There always is. Dawn came gray and slow off the sea, and the work woke in his hands before it woke in his head. He moved down the line the way he had once moved through a college ward, pulse, breath, skin, eyes, and the diagnoses came back to him whole, as if they had only been waiting in the dark for someone to ask. 2 with fever, most with the rope burns gone to weeping sores. All of them starved past the point where the body stops complaining and simply slows. He read the vials by touch out of long habit and began. Warming drafts first, then the fever tinctures, then a salve of bound root and tallow worked into wrists rubbed raw by 3 weeks of iron. The woman worked beside him and did not wait to be told twice. She knelt where he knelt, held the small ones still while he dressed their wrists, and turned his short instructions into the clan tongue for the ones who had no other words. A low, even sound, all consonants and quiet authority. He gave a measure of draught and named the count. She repeated it back, exact, and he understood she was not echoing him, but checking him. She watched his hands the whole while. Not his face, not his clouded eye. His hands. He had been studied by hostile men in fine rooms, and it had never felt like this, like being weighed by someone who already knew the trade. He opened his food store and gave it out without a word about its being the last of it. Hard bread, the smoked eel he had been rationing toward spring, the crock of honey he kept for Burns and had never once spread on his own bread. The Orcs ate the way the starved eat, slow and disbelieving, and the gruffness of them surprised him. A broad-shouldered man twice his weight broke his bread in half and pressed the larger piece on the boy beside him without looking, the way you do a thing you have always done. While Casper's back was turned, someone had taken up the bucket and gone to the rain butt and back, and someone else had begun wringing the boiled cloths and laying them in a row for him. And no one had asked, and no one had been asked. They had simply found the work and done it, the way water finds the low ground. The fevered ones came down by mid-morning. The room went quiet but for the stove and the breathing, and Casper sat at last on the cold edge of his own bench, his hands shaking now that they had nothing to hold. That was when she came and sat across from him. Up close, by daylight, he could see the rope scars old beneath the new ones at her wrists, and the bone beads still woven into her plate that the slavers had not bothered to take. And he thought, she kept her hair braided in that cage. Whatever else they took, she chose that. He knew the shape of that. It was the same reason he still wore a green glass lens at his throat for an eye that no longer saw. "You never answered me," she said. "In the water. Why would a man do that?" She did not soften it. Caspar looked at the 11 of them filling his small room, alive, and at his own stained hands, and he was too tired to dress it up. "Because I could," he said. "There was no one else, and I had the means. That is the whole of it." She watched him, unsatisfied, and he heard the rest come out of him before he chose to let it. "I spent years being told I was reckless. It cost me everything I had. And tonight, for the first time in a long while, recklessness was the correct diagnosis." He said the last word like a man laying down a stone he had carried too far. She did not understand the bitterness folded inside it, not yet, but she heard that it weighed something, and she did not look away from his ruined eye, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. The days that followed taught him their names. The leader was Lyra, and the others bent toward her the way reeds bend toward open water, without seeming to know they did it. The child who had clung to his coat was Nessa, 15 and quiet, who would not yet open her left fist for anyone. The broad man who shared his bread was called Boric, and there were 8 more, and by the 3rd day Caspar had them sorted in his head not as a crowd of strangers, but as people. This one's cough, that one's bad ankle, the old woman who would not lie down until everyone younger had. They were the Heron Reed, Lyra told him, marsh folk from the great fens up the coast, who fished and traded and had kept the peace with humankind for longer than anyone living could count. He had sold medicines to fen people his whole time here, and never once asked where the green ones came from. They mended faster than he expected. The fevers broke, the sores closed under his salve, and the firm ground around the cottage filled with low voices and the smell of the eel broth he kept on the stove. He watched them take the place over in small, careful ways. A drying rack rebuilt sturdier than he had ever managed it, the gravel path relaid where the rain had washed it thin, a snare set in the reeds that put a marsh hare in the pot without a word from anyone. Caspar had lived alone so long that the noise of other people should have grated. It did not. That surprised him more than he let it show. It was Lyra who told him the rest, on the 4th evening, while she ground bound root at his bench, because her hands could not sit idle. The slaver ring had worked this coast for years, she said. Not a raid here and there, a trade, steady and protected. "We sent word to the port the first time they took our people," she said, and her voice stayed level, which was somehow worse than if it had not. "The complaint went in. Nothing came back. We sent a second. A clan elder rode down to stand in the authorities' own hall." She set the pestle down. "He did not ride home. After that, no patrol ever came up our channel. The lawful boats turn back at the marsh mouth, always have. Someone tells them where not to look." Caspar went still. He felt it happen in his own body, the breath stopping, the hands going quiet on the bench. The way a man goes still when he hears, in a stranger's misfortune, the exact shape of his own. He knew this thing. Not the marsh, not the chains, but the engine underneath it, a wrong with a powerful hand laid over it, and an honest complaint that simply vanishes, and the quiet message passed down the line that this is not to be touched. He had spent years telling himself his ruin was a private accident, a piece of bad luck and his own carelessness. Sitting in his own cottage, hearing a green-skinned woman describe the machine that ate her clan, he could no longer pretend he did not recognize it. Lyra watched the recognition move across his face. She missed nothing. He had learned that the first night, in the water. "That means something to you," she said. "More than the rest of it." "What?" Caspar turned the green glass lens at his throat between two fingers, the way he did without noticing when he was about to lie, and then he stopped, because he was tired of that particular lie, and she had earned better. So he told her. The college, the patron, the compound that was profitable and dangerous both, and the safety finding he had refused to falsify. The explosion in his own laboratory that took his eye and his hands and his name in a single night, recorded forever as proof of his recklessness. "They did not even have to kill me," he said. "They only had to make me the kind of man no one believes." He had never said it aloud. Not once, in all the years at the marsh edge, that he had not been careless, that he had been right, and destroyed precisely for being right. The words came out flat and worn, but they came out, and the small room held them. Lyra did not offer him comfort. He understood already that she was not a person who reached for the easy thing. She only looked at him a long moment, and then at the 11 of her people breathing in his warm room, and said very quietly, "Then you already know what kind of men we are dealing with." The stove ticked. Neither of them named the thing taking shape between them. It was too early, and they both knew it, and the silence said it anyway. The girl began to follow him, Nessa kept to his blind side at first, where he would not catch her watching, and trailed him from bench to shelf to stove, the way a marsh bird shadows a wading deer for the things it stirs up. Casper pretended not to notice, because he understood pretending not to notice was sometimes the only door you could leave open for a frightened thing. By the second day, she stood close enough to see his hands work. By the third, she was handing him stoppers before he reached for them. He had taught students once, in a bright hall full of young men who already knew everything. He had forgotten what it was to teach someone who only wanted to know. So he showed her. He took down 2 strips of bark and laid them on the bench between them. "Fever bark," he said, tapping the curled one, "and binding root. People die of the difference." He had her feel the cut faces, fever bark furred and bitter to the tongue's edge, binding root smooth and faintly sweet, and watched her commit it to memory with a seriousness that put the college men to shame. She learned the smell of bound root salve, the weight of a true measure in the small horn spoon, the way you read a drying leaf by its crackle and not its color. She did not speak much, but she stopped flinching when he moved on her blind side, and that was its own kind of answer. Her left hand stayed shut the whole while. He had marked it the first night and said nothing. A fist held closed for 3 weeks does not open because a stranger asks. On the 4th afternoon, while he ground willow at the bench, she set something down beside the pestle and drew her hand back fast, the way you set bait. A small fish, carved from bone, worn pale at the nose where a thumb had rubbed it. "My mother made it," Nessa said, to the bench and not to him. "I kept my hand shut on it the whole time, so they could not take it." Casper looked at the little fish and did not touch it. "Then you kept the most important thing," he said. "The rest was only iron." She closed her hand over it again, but slower now, and she did not leave the room. It did something to him he had not braced for. He had spent years thinking of himself as the broken-off end of a thing, the disgraced remnant of an alchemist, a man who once mattered and now sold cough drafts to fen folk at the edge of a swamp. Standing over the bench with a 15-year-old orc spelling back the difference between 2 barks in careful clan-accented words, he felt the old thing return without permission. He was a master of an art, and the art was good, and it was passing into hands that would carry it. The feeling was so unfamiliar it took him a moment to name it. It was not pride. It was use. He had been useful for a thing only he could do, and someone would be better for it after he was gone. Lyra watched all of it. She sat mending a torn cloak by the window with her plait over one shoulder, and her amber eyes moved between the man and the girl and missed nothing, the way they had missed nothing in the cage. Once, when Nessa got a measure right, and Casper told her so plainly, Lyra's mouth moved at one corner. Not a smile, nothing so loud, just the smallest loosening of a face that had held itself hard for a long time. Casper caught it on his good side and looked away before she could see him see it. Some things you let a person keep private. He had wanted that mercy often enough himself to know its worth. The light was going amber over the reed beds when Nessa stilled. She had her mother's fish in her fist again, but her eyes had gone past the window to the firm ground's edge where the tall reeds began. Casper followed her look on his good side. For a breath he saw nothing but the reeds bending in the wind off the sea. Then he saw that one stand of them was not bending with the rest. A shape stood among them, low and hooded, gone still the instant his eye found it. Lyra was already on her feet, the cloak fallen from her hands, her whole body turned toward the marsh like a struck bell. Someone was out there. Someone had been watching the cottage for some time. The shape came out of the reeds, slow, hands open and away from the body, which Caspar understood for the warning it was. Only someone who knows exactly how dangerous she is bothers to show you her empty hands. She was taller than Lyra, and built like a thing that had spent its life moving through deep mud against resistance, lean and hard, with 2 long knives at her belt she did not reach for. Black braids hung, weighted with bone and iron, a single heron feather worked into one. A scar crossed her right cheekbone, pale against the green. Her eyes found Lyra and changed, and then found Caspar on his good side, and went flat as wet slate. "Thala," Lyra breathed, and the word broke something loose in the hard room. The sisters met in the middle of the firm ground, and held on, and Caspar looked at the stove, and gave them the privacy of his bad eye. He gathered the rest of it from the low, fast clan speech, and from Lyra's translating after. Thala had tracked the ring through the coastal marshes for 3 weeks, always a day behind the barge, sleeping in the wet, living on what the fen gave. She had come to cut her sister out of a cage with her own knives. She had found her instead in a human's cottage, mended, fed, teaching the youngest the names of herbs. And Caspar watched the warrior's relief curdle by slow degrees into a suspicion she did not bother to hide. A human. Her sister safe in a human's house. In Thala's world, that arithmetic did not come out clean. "Why," Thala said to him, in blunt trade tongue, the first words she spent on him directly. She stood close, and the size of her was a fact in the small space, and Caspar did not step back because stepping back is its own kind of lie. "A human pulls 11 of us out of the water and asks nothing, feeds us his winter, teaches my sister's hand to a child. Men do not do this for nothing. So, what is the price, apothecary?" It was not a question so much as a test laid down on the bench between them like the 2 barks. Caspar held her gray stare with his one good eye. "No price," he said. "I had the means, and there was no one else. You can call that a lie if you like. I have been called worse and survived it." It was Lyra who broke it, because Thala had not come to argue philosophy. The ring still ran, she said. Lyra was free, the 11 were free, but the barges still pulled the channel at night, and the port authority still turned the lawful boats back at the marsh mouth. And come spring they would raid the great fens again and take 11 more. Thala's answer was simple and old as blood. Find the ring. Cut its throat. She had the knives, and now she had the trail. Caspar listened to her lay it out and felt the cold settle in him, because he knew exactly where that road ended. He had walked toward a powerful, protected man once, certain that being right was a kind of armor. He still wore the proof of how that went on his face. "You will kill the men on the barges," he said quietly, "and the port will hire 10 more by summer, because the port is paid to. You cannot win this with knives, I know. I tried the honest version of knives, and it cost me an eye and my name." He set both stained hands flat on the bench. "A protected wrong does not fall to violence. It falls when you make the protection too dangerous to keep. When you put proof in front of a court high enough that the powerful hand cannot reach it. Do not kill the slavers. Burn the thing above them. Expose the authority that shields them, by paper, in the open, where killing only makes martyrs, and proof makes ash." The room went still. Thala's jaw worked. She did not agree. But for the first time she looked at the scarred human as if he might be something other than a soft place her sister had mistaken for safe. Let me ask you something before we go on. You have just heard a man who lost everything tell a warrior to put down the knife and pick up the slower, harder weapon, the truth, laid out where it cannot be buried. Have you ever been there yourself? Wanted to burn the whole rotten thing down when some quieter part of you knew that patience was the only path that actually won? I think most of us have stood exactly on that line at least once. If a story about choosing the harder right over the easy wrong is the kind you want to keep hearing, take a second now to subscribe and leave a like. It tells me to keep telling them. Now, back to the marsh, and a plan no one in that room yet believed could work. He did not answer Thala's doubt with words. He went to the workroom's far corner, to a chest he kept under the reagent shelf, and worked a catch by feel because the light was poor, and his hands knew it better than his eye. Out came ledgers. Not one, a stack of them. Cheap fen paper bound in waxed thread, the covers swollen and dried again from 3 winters of damp. He set them on the long bench under the candle and opened the topmost to a page of his own cramped hand, line after line of dates and short notes, and watched the 2 sisters lean in without yet understanding what they were looking at. "I log the channel," he said. "Every barge that passes in the dock. I have done it for 3 years. Lyra turned a page, then another, slow. "Why," she said, the same word Thala had thrown at him, but softer now, asking. Caspar rubbed the green lens at his throat. "Habit," he said, and it was the truth, but a thin slice of it. "A researcher writes down what he sees, especially the thing no one else thinks worth writing. I told myself it was nothing. A man alone at the edge of a marsh, counting boats he is not meant to count." He had never said the rest aloud, not even to himself in plain words. "I think part of me knew that one day someone honest would come up this channel asking the right question, and the only thing I would have to give them was a clean record. So I kept it clean." Thala had not touched the ledgers. She stood with her arms crossed and her gray eyes moving over the pages as if they might bite. "Marks on paper," she said. "Words. My people have sent words to that port for years. Words go in, and they do not come out." Caspar nodded. He had thought the same of his own testimony once, and been right to. "These are not a complaint," he said. "A complaint asks a powerful man to judge himself. This does not ask him anything. It shows a pattern, and a pattern cannot be talked out of the room." He drew the candle closer and turned the lens up to his eye to read his own small hand. "Look, same nights near enough. The barges run on a tide and a moon, always the dark of the month, always the same reach of the channel, the one stretch the lawful patrol turns back from, every single time." He walked them through it the way he had once walked a hall full of students through a proof, except that this time the room held him instead of weighing him. 3 years of entries, the cargo sounds logged each time, chain, and the particular dragging weight of people who do not want to move. The lantern codes the barges swung at the marsh mouth, the same 2-and-1 swing answered from the dark each time by a light that should not have been there. "A smuggler can sneak past a patrol once," Caspar said. "Twice. Not for 3 years on a fixed schedule through the same blind reach. That is not luck. That is a patrol being told, month after month, where not to look. And only one office on this coast can tell a patrol that." He let the candle gutter between them. It points at the Port Authority. Every page. I have been holding the rope that hangs them for 3 years and not known it was a rope." Something moved in Thala's hard face. She uncrossed her arms and laid one scarred finger on the open page, on a date, the way you touch a thing to be sure it is real. Caspar understood what it cost her, to find, in a human's drawer, 3 years of patient witness to the machine that ate her clan, kept by a man who had asked for nothing and expected no one to come. "You wrote down the night they took us," she said, low. He turned to the right ledger without looking, the way he found a vial, and there it was. Late autumn, the dark of the moon, chain, and the dragging weight. The 2-and-1 swing answered from shore. Lyra put her hand flat over the entry and held it there, and for a moment no one in the room breathed. Then Caspar turned the page forward, past the last entry, to the clean paper at the end. "And here," he said, "is the thing that matters now. The pattern holds, which means I can tell you, near enough to the night, when the next barge will pass." He named the date. It sat in the candlelight between the 3 of them, close enough to reach. Thala's hand went, at last, to the hilt of one knife, not in threat, but in the old reflex of a hunter who has just been handed the one thing she lacked. Not a trail growing cold, but a day, and a place, and an enemy that would come to her. They had 3 days, and Caspar spent them at his bench instead of in the reeds, because his weapon took mixing. He needed 2 things, he told them, and neither was meant to kill. The first was a smoke reagent, a powder that, struck wet, threw up a cloud thick and stinging enough to blind a deck and set men coughing where they stood. The second was a slick reagent, an oil he thinned and soaped until a single flask poured across planking turned firm footing into a thing that threw a grown man flat. He filled a dozen vials of each and read them into fresh slots on his bandolier by shape, so he could find them in the dark with his eye useless. "Chaos," he said, "not blood. A man on his back coughing cannot pole a barge, and a man we keep alive can name the one above him. A dead one names no one." Thala did not like it. She came to him the night before, alone, and put it to him flat the way she put everything. "Say it goes wrong," she said. "Say the captain has a blade at my sister's people, and your smoke does nothing, and the only thing between us and a slaughter is a knife in his throat. Do you hold your fine line then, apothecary? Or do we bleed for your principle?" It was a test laid bare, and Caspar understood she was not asking about the plan. She was asking whether the human's mercy was a real thing with a spine in it, or a soft man's comfort that would fold the moment it cost something. "If your sister's people are in danger, you do what you must," he said. "But the plan is built so it never comes to that. I have spent my whole life making sure the dangerous thing stays in the flask. Trust the work or trust nothing. Those are the only 2 choices I can offer you." She held his eye a long moment. Then she nodded once, which from her was a treaty. The night came cold and fogged off the sea, the dark of the moon, just as the ledger promised. Caspar set them on the ground he knew, a reach of the channel where the firm earth ran close along the deep water on the landward side, narrow and certain to a man who had walked it for years, a death trap of soft mud to anyone who had not. Thala and the 4 heron reed well enough to fight waited in the reeds with reed rope, and the long marsh knives kept sheathed by his asking. Caspar crouched at the water's edge with his vials and his staff, his bad side to the bank, his good eye on the black channel. They heard the barge before they saw it. The poles dip and pull, the chain sound, the low voices of men who believed the dark belonged to them. Then the lantern swung the 2-in-1, and from the far bank a light answered that should not have been there, and Caspar felt the old cold certainty settle. Every word of it was true. He let the barge draw level with the firm ground before he moved. Then he struck the first smoke vial wet against his staff and threw it onto the deck, and a second, and a third, fast, the way he had once worked a reaction against the clock. The cloud went up gray and stinging, and the voices turned to coughing and curses. He followed with the slick flasks, pitched low and flat to break across the planking, and the next thing the night gave back was the sound of men going down hard on a deck that had turned to glass under them. "Now," Thala said, not loud, and the reeds emptied. They came across the firm line he had marked while the slavers floundered on the slick and choked in the smoke, and it was over faster than the mixing had taken. The heron reed knew rope. No knife came out of its sheath. When the smoke thinned, there were 5 slavers face down and bound on the deck, and one man held upright between 2 green hands, who could only be the captain, older, hard, a heavy ring of keys at his belt, and a look on him that had ordered a great many cages locked. Boric came up from the hold with the thing they had truly come for, a strong box, iron-banded, the kind a careful man keeps his accounts in. Thala set the point of one knife under the captain's chin, not to cut, only so he would understand the arithmetic, and Caspar watched the warrior hold her line exactly as he had held his, taking the man alive when every year of her wanted otherwise. That, he thought, was its own kind of mercy, and a harder one than his. The captain looked from the warrior to the scarred human with his belt of little glass vials, and began, against all sense, to smile. "You think you've taken something," he said, working a mouthful of marsh water to spit. "A box of paper and a marsh full of frogs. You don't know whose name is in that box, apothecary. You put it in front of any court on this coast, and it vanishes, and you vanish after it." He laughed, low and certain. "There are men you do not touch. He is one of them." Caspar took the strong box from Boric and felt its weight, and the captain's certainty did not frighten him the way it should have. He had heard that exact certainty before, in a bright hall, from men who had been sure no one would ever believe a one-eyed wreck. He set the box under his arm. "I know the kind of man he is," he said. "Better than you do." The captain held his certainty until Thala set him down in Caspar's cottage with the strong box open on the bench in front of him. She did not touch him. She only crouched to his level and told him, in level trade tongue, the 2 roads he had. One was clan justice, to go up the coast to the great fens and answer to the matriarch whose people he had chained, and Thala described, without heat, what that court looked like. The other was to speak a name aloud, here, now, and let the human's law have him instead. "Choose which judges you," she said. "I am at peace with either." The captain looked at the warrior, and at the green-skinned dozen filling the room, and at the iron-banded box that held his own accounts, and the smile finally went out of him. He gave them a name, the Harbor Reeve, a man called Mott, who held the port's authority and its patrol orders both. He confirmed the rest in a flat, beaten voice, a fixed sum per head, paid quarterly, in exchange for a patrol that turned back at the marsh mouth and complaints that never reached a desk. Caspar drew the records from the strong box and read them by lens, page by page, and there it was, in a clerk's neat hand, dates that lined up to the night against his own ledgers, sums, and an initial at the foot of each quarter that the captain named as Mott's own. 3 years of Caspar's patient witness and 3 years of Mott's careful bookkeeping, laid side by side on one bench, told the same story from two ends: the pattern and the payment, the thing that could not be talked out of a room. "We take it to the port magistrate," Thala said, and Caspar shook his head before she finished. "No." He set the lens down. "The port magistrate sits under the same roof as the reeve, and dines at the same table. You do not bring proof of a man's crime to the men he pays." I learned that with my own face. He had brought his own truth once to the very people most invested in burying it, and walked out blind and disgraced for the favor. He would not lead these 11 down the same road, dressed as hope. "There is only one court high enough to be past Mott's reach," he said. "The Crown Magistrate, inland at the capital. Days of hard travel on the firm roads and dangerous ones, but the only honest seat above a man like him." That was when the rest of it landed on him, the part he had been stepping around since the strongbox came out of the hold. Paper did not speak for itself. A court would want the man whose hand had filled 3 years of ledgers, would want him to stand up and read his own record aloud and answer for it under questioning. The witness who could make the evidence speak was the disgraced alchemist himself. To finish this, he would have to walk, of his own will, back into a high court of the same world that had cast him out, with his clouded eye and his stained hands, and the official record still calling him reckless. He sat down on the bench's cold edge. The room had gone quiet around him. He had hidden at the marsh edge for years, precisely so he would never again stand in a room full of men in good coats, deciding what he was worth. Lyra came and sat across from him, the way she had that first gray dawn, and she did not soften it, because she never did. "You are afraid of the court," she said. "Not the road, the room." Caspar turned the green lens at his throat. "The last time I stood in a place like that, they took everything I had and made it look like my fault. I've spent 4 years agreeing with them, a little, to make it bearable." He looked at his hands. "I am not certain I can walk back in." Lyra was silent a moment. "When you waded into the channel," she said, "you could not see your left side at all. You went anyway, into the dark, on faith that your good eye and your staff would find the ground. This is the same water." She put one scarred hand flat on the bench between them, not touching him, only there. "Only this time you will not be wading in alone. We were the helpless ones in the cage. Now we stand on the bank, and we go in with you." Caspar looked at the hand on the bench, and at the 11 faces that had been strangers drowning in iron a month ago, and were now, somehow, the only people in the world who would walk into that court at his side. Thala was already pulling maps of the firm roads from her gear. Nessa had her mother's fish in her open palm, and was watching him the way she watched him decide which bark to cut. He stood, slowly, and took up the strongbox and his ledgers, and held them against his chest the way he had held the children out of the water. "Then we leave at first light," he said. "And I will say it all aloud, in their court, in front of whoever they send. Let them call me reckless one more time." Outside, the fog was lifting off the marsh, and somewhere up the coast a road ran inland toward a room he had sworn he would never enter again. The road inland felt wrong under him for the first day. Caspar had not left the marsh in 4 years, and the firm ground that did not test back against his staff, the dry air, the towns with their lit windows, all of it pressed on him like a coat cut for a smaller man. He kept the strong box and the ledges wrapped in oilcloth, and never out of reach. And at night, by the fire, Lyra would set out his vials in their order, so his hands had something true to find in the dark. Thala rode point and rear by turns, and spoke little. Nessa kept the carved fish in her open hand the whole way, no longer hiding it. By the time the capital's walls rose ahead of them, gray against a cold sky, Caspar's dread had worn down to something flat and usable. He had been afraid the whole road. He simply went anyway, the way he had gone into the channel. The Crown Court was the kind of room that had once broken him. High windows, dark wood, men in good coats arranged by rank, and the cold weight of people who decide what a life is worth. He stopped at the threshold. His blind side was a wall of nothing, his hands stained, the green lens at his throat the last fragment of the day they had ruined him here, in a room just like this one. Then Lyra stepped up on his left, on his blind side, where he could not see her but could feel her there, and he went in. The Crown Magistrate sat above them all, an old woman, plain-robed, with a face worn hard and clean as a tidestone, and eyes that did not flatter and did not flinch. She did not look at his scarred eye the way the others did. She looked at the oilcloth bundle under his arm. He laid it out the way he had once laid out a proof, except that this time his voice did not shake by the third sentence. 3 years of channel logs in his own hand, dates, cargo sounds, the 2-in-1 lantern codes, the harbor reeve's own pay records, sums and quarterly initials set beside his ledgers so that any clerk in the room could match the night's. The captain's sworn testimony given before witnesses, naming Mott and the arrangement. And then Lyra and Thala, who stood and told the court plainly what it was to be taken, caged, and poled through a marsh in the dark while a lawful patrol turned its boats around at the river mouth. The magistrate stopped one of the Reeve's advocates twice when he tried to make the case about the witness's blood instead of the Reeve's books. "I am reading the ledgers, not the witnesses," she said. "The ledgers do not have a color." It took the better part of 2 days, and at the end of it, she did the thing Caspar had stopped believing a court could do. She followed the evidence. The harbor reeve was arrested in his own port that same week. The patrol orders were pulled and recut. The ring that had run the coast for years came apart in a fortnight once the protection above it was gone. Caspar stood in the cold, high room and watched a protected wrong fall the slow way, by paper, in the open, the way he had told Thala it could fall, the way he had not fully believed himself. He felt Thala's eyes on him. When he turned, the warrior gave him a single nod, the same treaty she had offered the night before the ambush, but it weighed more now. The human's slow weapon had worked where her knives never could have. She did not say it. She did not have to. Then came the thing he had not gone looking for. A Crown clerk, tracing the Reeve's accounts upstream to see who else fed the network, read out the names of the men whose money moved through the Port Authority, and one of them stopped Caspar's breath where he stood. The patron, the financier whose dangerous compound he had refused to lie for, the man who had arranged an explosion in a laboratory and called it recklessness. His money ran through the same port, the same protected channels, tangled into the same rotten authority that had caged the Heron Reed. Caspar reached for the bench to steady himself on his blind side, and Lyra's hand was already there. The thread that had ruined him and the thread that had enslaved her clan were not 2 threads at all. They had been one thread the whole time. The old magistrate watched it land on him from her high seat, and she missed nothing, the way Lyra missed nothing. She had read his name on the channel logs. She knew now whose hand had kept 3 years of patient witness at the edge of a marsh, and why. She set down her pen. "Apothecary," she said into the quiet room. "Your record names you as discredited. The same network you have just laid open is the one that discredited you. This court will not pretend it cannot see that." She let the words settle on the cold air. "I am ordering your own case reopened." Caspar stood very still in the high room that had broken him once, with a green-skinned hand on his blind side and his ruined ledgers spread before an honest court. And for the first time in 4 years, he could not tell whether the thing rising in his chest was grief or its opposite. 6 months turned the marsh from cold autumn toward the edge of spring. The reopened inquiry did its slow work in the high inland court while Caspar went back to his benches, and one gray morning a crown rider came up the firm road with a sealed letter that he had to read 3 times through his lens before he let himself believe it. The laboratory had been no accident. The inquiry proved it whole. The explosion that took his eye and his name was arranged. The safety finding he had refused to falsify was the true one all along, and the record that called him reckless was struck and written clean. He sat with the letter a long while and did not feel the triumph he had once dreamed of. He felt something quieter and harder to hold, the loosening of a weight he had carried so long he had stopped feeling it as a separate thing. The colleges that cast him out wrote within the month. Polished letters, generous terms, a chair at the City College of Physic. All the warmth of men who had found they were wrong about a thing that now cost them nothing to admit. Caspar read each one once and set them by the stove for kindling. He had spent 4 years bitter that the marsh had reduced him from a man meant to save thousands to one who saved lives a tincture at a time. He understood now that he had held the diagnosis backwards. The thousands had never had faces. The fen folk did, and so did a girl who could tell 3 barks blind, and you could not weigh the one against the other once you had learned the names. He wrote back briefly, without heed, and declined them all. The Heron Reed bound themselves to him in the formal way of the clan, a thing not lightly done. His medicines traveled up the coast, now to the great fens, carried by clan punts, and the marsh folks' herb lore came back down to his workroom in return. Roots and reckonings no college had ever catalogued. Nessa had stayed as his apprentice, the first he had ever taken in a life of teaching men who already thought they knew everything. She ground fever bark at his bench with a hand surer than students twice her age, her mother's bonefish strung now at her wrist in the open, where she no longer needed to hide it. Thala had taken the marsh channel as her charge, watching the dark reach where the barges once ran, so that nothing of the old trade ever came up that water again. And Lyra had stayed. She was the matriarch's daughter. A high seat waited for her up the coast among her own people, and she had set it aside the way Caspar had set aside the colleges, and neither of them made a speech about it. Some choices you do not explain. You simply keep turning up at the same bench morning after morning until the staying stops being a decision and becomes the shape of a life. She had asked him once, in the cage, why a broken man would wade into a black marsh for strangers, and had not understood the answer. She understood it now. He was a person who could not stand at the water's edge with the means to act and watch the helpless go under. So it turned out was she. That was the whole of it, and it had taken them both the long way round to find it. Let me ask you one last thing, now that you have come all this way with them. Caspar could have gone back to the grand life that was owed to him, the chair, the thousands, the name made loud again. He chose the 11 faces in front of him instead. Have you ever had to choose like that? Between the big thing you always thought you wanted and the smaller, truer thing standing right in front of you? I'd genuinely like to know which one you reached for. If this story stayed with you, leave a like and subscribe so these quiet ones keep finding you. And tell me down below what your marsh edge turned out to be. A clear, cold morning then. The cottage stood larger than it had, a second workroom built on through the winter by green hands and human ones together, and over the door a new sign where a heron reed clan mark sat beside the apothecary's pestle, the two carved into one board. Inside, Nessa ground herbs at her bench and hummed something in the clan tongue. Out on the firm ground, Thala worked tar into the seams of a punt, unhurried. And at the long bench in the main room, Caspar and Lyra sat over their work, his vials and her roots spread across the same wood, he naming the apothecary's art to her, she naming the marsh lore back to him. Two traditions meeting on one table without anyone deciding they should. At his throat hung the green glass lens from the day he was ruined, kept still, but no longer a relic of shame, only a piece of glass that had seen him through. And at Lyra's throat, on the cord the slavers had never made her remove, hung a thing that had not been there before, a small heron of green glass, the silver bird from her ruined dress born again in the glass of his ruined past, made by his own hand at his own kiln. The black marsh swallows things and does not give them back. On one midnight it gave back 11 lives, because a man they had all called reckless turned out, in the only reckoning that ever counted, to be reckless in exactly the right amount.